Okay, let's unpack this. Imagine, right, if I handed you a guaranteed, perfectly data-backed strategy to make your team 30% more productive overnight. You would take it, right?
Oh, absolutely. I mean, any manager would.
Right. Every CEO, every startup founder would implement it literally immediately. Yet the specific demographic that is capable of unlocking that massive productivity boost currently has, well, the lowest employment rate of any group in the country.
Which is just a wild statistic when you actually sit down and think about it.
It really is. So today is Monday, March 16th, 2026. And while the calendar says today is the exact kickoff of Neurodiversity Celebration Week, which runs right through March 20th, by the way, the mission of our deep dive today is entirely focused on you.
Yeah, on your daily life, really.
Exactly. Whether you are leading a massive corporate team or just navigating your own career path or, just trying to be a better coworker, we're looking at how to actually transform our workplaces from merely being aware of neurodiversity to being actively functionally inclusive for neurodivergent talent.
And to do that properly, we're pulling from a really specific stack of sources today. We've got the official 2026 Neurodiversity Celebration Week campaign materials, plus this incredibly detailed guide from ACUS FAFES. They're the workplace relations experts on making organizations genuinely neuro-inclusive.
Oh, and the resources from inclusive employers, right?
Yes, exactly. A suite of strategic resources from them. So we are really looking at the actual mechanics of how to make this work on the ground.
But before we even get into the hard data or the corporate guidelines, I want to start with a visual from the campaign sources. It's the official logo for this 2026 initiative.
The great logo.
It really is. If you haven't seen it, picture a classic light bulb, just a crisp black outline. But inside the glass, where you'd normally expect to see that delicate little wire filament, there's a brain.
Right.
And it's not drawn in some medical anatomical way. It's made up of these brightly colored, interlocking puzzle-like shapes, vibrant reds, blues, greens, and yellows.
It's a striking piece of design. And what's fascinating here is how perfectly it encapsulates the entire theme of this movement. I mean, think about what a light bulb represents in our culture.
Yeah, an idea.
Exactly. An idea, illumination, a sudden breakthrough. By placing this brilliantly colored, complex brain inside of that bulb, the campaign is communicating a fundamental truth. Neurodiversity is not about deficits or brokenness or, things that need to be fixed.
It's just a different kind of light.
Right. It is about illuminating entirely new, brilliant ways of thinking and problem solving.
It's not a dim bulb. It's just a differently wired bulb that might, light up a room in a wavelength you've never even considered before. And to understand how this whole global movement started, we really have to look at the origin story because it honestly blew my mind.
Oh, Sienna's story is incredible.
Yeah. This entire global week was founded back in 2018 by someone named Sienna Castellan.
And her lived experience is really the entire engine behind why this week exists today. Sienna is autistic, dyslexic, dyspraxic, and has ADHD. And she began her formal advocacy work when she was just 13 years old.
13? That's middle school.
Exactly. At that age, she was simply looking for better online resources to support students with special educational needs. She looked around, saw this massive gap in practical, empathetic support, and just decided to step up and build it herself.
Wait, pause for a second. Dyspraxia. I know we hear that term occasionally, usually lumped in with other neurodivergent traits, but what does that actually mean for someone's day-to-day experience?
Yeah, it's an important distinction. Dyspraxia is essentially a difference in how the brain processes physical movement and coordination.
Okay, so fine motor skills.
Yeah, things like typing, writing, even tying shoelaces.
Yeah.
And general spatial awareness, too, has absolutely nothing to do with intelligence. But in a traditional school or work environment that demands, say, rapid physical organization or specific manual dexterity, it presents a really unique set of friction points.
And Sienna had to navigate all of that simultaneously.
She did.
Which makes it even more mind-blowing that at 13 an age where most kids are just trying to survive the social minefield of the cafeteria, she's out there launching a global advocacy platform, and she didn't stop there. Our sources point out she's also the best-selling author of the Spectrum Girls Survival Guide,
which is a fantastic resource. And the core philosophy that Sienna built this campaign upon is what really changed the game. She recognized that the prevailing narrative, especially during her childhood, was overwhelmingly focused on the challenges.
Right, like a very medicalized view.
Precisely. Society looked at neurodivergence entirely through the lens of neurological deficits. Her goal was to completely shatter that narrative. She demanded a balanced view that focuses equally on talents and strengths.
Moving away from what's wrong with someone.
Exactly. It's a fundamental shift from asking, what can't this person do, to asking, what unique, extraordinary capabilities does this person possess?
You know, reading through these sources and thinking about that shift from deficits to unique capabilities, an analogy kept popping into my head. It's like looking at computers running entirely different operating systems.
Oh, I get that.
Yeah. So let's say the vast majority of the corporate world runs on Windows. A neurodivergent brain might be running on Linux or, a highly customized Mac OS.
Right.
The computer isn't broken. The hardware is spectacular. It just processes data differently. And depending on the specific task you give it, that alternative operating system might actually run a lot more efficiently than the standard one.
And if we push that operating system analogy further, it explains the underlying mechanism of neurodivergent talent beautifully.
Yeah.
I mean, a standard Windows machine is great for general, everyday, predictable office tasks.
Sure.
But if you're trying to build a massive, complex back-end server, or you need a system that can process heavy data loads and recognize really obscure patterns, you don't use the standard operating system. You use Linux.
Because it's built for that.
Exactly. The alternative operating system is vastly superior for complex problem solving because it approaches the code from an entirely different architecture.
And here is why you, listening right now, should care about this profoundly. Back in 2020, over 760 schools and more than 500,000 students participated in Neurodiversity Celebration Week.
That's a huge number.
It is, and that was 6 years ago. Think about the timeline. Those 500,000 students, they're graduating. They're entering the workforce right now. They might be sitting in the lobby interviewing for jobs at your company today.
They absolutely are.
So understanding these different operating systems is no longer just a nice-to-have progressive HR initiative. It's the baseline reality of the modern talent pool.
But here is the wall we hit. We have this massive groundswell of support in middle schools, high schools, universities. But what happens when those 500,000 supported students graduate and try to get a job?
Yeah, the transition.
The data shows they're basically walking straight off a cliff. The translation of that momentum into the adult workforce has hit a staggering roadblock.
Let's get into the numbers, because this is where the story gets really complicated and, frankly, a little infuriating.
It is infuriating. The Inclusive Employers resources highlight two specific statistics that, when you place them side by side, create a really jarring paradox. First, research shows that when the right support is in place, neurodiverse teams are a staggering 30% more productive than purely neurotypical teams.
30%. That is an absurd competitive advantage. I mean, in any business context, if you find a tool that boosts productivity by even 5%, companies fight tooth and nail to acquire it. But
30%. And we should explain why that boost happens, because it goes right back to your Linux analogy. It comes down to lateral thinking and bypassing groupthink.
Okay, break that down for me.
Well, if you have a team of 5 people who all run the Windows operating system, they're all going to look at a financial report or a marketing problem and spot the exact same trends.
Right, they've all been trained the same way.
Exactly. But introduce a Linux user to that team, someone with ADHD or autism, and suddenly you have someone who recognizes entirely different data patterns. They bypass the standard assumptions. They see the anomaly that everyone else just glossed over. That diverse cognitive processing is what drives that 30% surge.
Okay, I am totally sold. Businesses should be throwing money at this demographic. So what's the second statistic?
A recent report by the Office for National Statistics, the ONS, shows that just 21.7% of autistic people are in employment.
Wait, 21.7?
Yeah, that makes them the least likely to be in work of any disabled group in the country.
Wait, I don't get it. That is a wild disconnect. If these teams are 30% more productive, why is the employment rate so tragically low? Where is the breakdown happening? Are companies just building front doors that neurodivergent people literally cannot get through?
That is the core of the issue, and it's precisely what the guidelines from ACIS try to dismantle. The front door to the corporate world is fundamentally broken.
Stop.
Well, traditional recruitment processes are practically designed to filter out neurodivergent talent, entirely by accident. AGIS breaks this down into very actionable mechanics, and it starts before the candidate even submits an application. It starts with the job advert.
Ah, the dreaded wall of corporate jargon.
Yes. Job ads are notorious for unnecessary jargon and long, intimidating lists of vague requirements. ACUS advises employers to explicitly separate which skills and experiences are essential for the role and which are merely desirable.
Give me an example of how that actually plays out.
Okay, imagine a role that involves intense, heads-down data analysis, but absolutely zero client-facing presentations.
A pure numbers job.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Yet, because the HR department uses a standard template, the job ad lists excellent outgoing communication skills as a core requirement.
Right, they just left it in there.
Yeah. Now, a neurotypical person might read that, roll their eyes, and apply anyway, knowing it's just corporate filler. But a neurodivergent applicant, perhaps someone who is autistic, might take that requirement quite literally.
Oh, I see.
They look at it and say, well, I don't have excellent outgoing presentation skills, so I do not meet the criteria. And they self-select out. The company just accidentally filtered out a highly capable data analyst because of a lazy copy-paste job.
That makes so much sense. The literal interpretation acts as an invisible barrier.
It really does. ACUS also recommends making it explicitly clear on the application that candidates can ask for reasonable adjustments for the interview. And this is crucial. Candidates should not need a formal medical diagnosis to get those adjustments.
Because getting a diagnosis takes forever, right?
Oh, getting an adult autism or ADHD diagnosis can take years on waiting lists.
Yeah.
And it can cost thousands of dollars out of pocket. Employers should not be demanding a doctor's note just to make a preliminary interview accessible.
There was a highly specific example in the ECUS guide that I loved because it stripped away all the corporate theory and showed exactly how this plays out in the real world. The bakery example.
Oh yeah, let's walk through the mechanics of that one.
Okay, so a bakery is hiring a new shop assistant. An applicant who is autistic contacts the bakery ahead of time and asks to see the interview questions in advance.
Which is a very reasonable request.
Right. But historically, a lot of hiring managers might balk at that. They think, that's cheating. You can't see the test before you take it.
Which is a terrible way to look at an interview.
Exactly. And ACUS points out a brilliant reality check here. An interview should not be a memory test unless the job actually requires you to memorize things on the spot. So the bakery owner thinks about it and agrees to provide the questions, but they strike a very clever compromise.
The hidden question.
Yes. They agree to keep just one question hidden. Why? Because that specific question is designed to test how the applicant handles unexpected scenarios, which happens in a bakery. A customer drops a birthday cake or suddenly changes a massive order at the last second.
It is a perfect example of practical mutual agreement. The employer gets to test the actual functional skill they need to test adaptability in a crisis, and the applicant gets to prepare for the rest of the interview without unnecessary, crippling anxiety blocking their ability to simply show their competence.
But getting hired is really only half the battle, right? Let's say you fix the front door, the applicant crushes the interview, they get the job. Now they actually have to show up on Monday morning, navigate the fluorescent lights, the office politics, and just the daily corporate grind.
And the daily environment presents a whole new set of sensory and operational challenges. But the foundational mindset for addressing them goes right back to what Sienna Castellan advocated for, a strengths-based approach.
How does that look in practice?
Well, the Inclusive Employer source features a powerful perspective from Zainab Ali. She's a marketing and communications executive there. She is autistic, and she noted that taking a strengths-based approach to her neurodivergence, having a genuinely supportive team and manager, and working with her autism instead of fighting against it, actually increased her confidence and dramatically helped progress her career.
Working with it instead of against it.
Yeah.
I really love that. And reading the ACUS guidelines on daily workplace adjustments, it brought up a concept that I think perfectly explains how to execute this. Have you ever heard of the curb cut effect?
The urban planning concept.
Yes. For anyone listening who hasn't heard of it, decades ago, disability advocates fought incredibly hard to get city curbs cut down into little slanted ramps at street intersections.
Right, for accessibility.
Exactly. The goal was simply so people in wheelchairs could cross the street safely. But once cities actually built them, an amazing thing happened. Suddenly, parents pushing baby strollers, delivery workers hauling heavy hand carts, travelers dragging rolling suitcases, and kids on skateboards were all using them.
It helped everyone.
Yes. A specific accommodation designed for one group ended up benefiting universally. Everyone's life got easier. And reading the ACUS guide, They are basically recommending that companies bring the curb cut effect directly into the office.
Oh, that's interesting. How does that translate to a corporate environment?
So they suggest offering things like noise-canceling headphones or access to quiet, low-stimulation private spaces to all workers.
Not just those with a diagnosis.
Right, not just the people who have an official HR file stating they have ADHD or autism. If you just make it a standard piece of office equipment that anyone can request, a neurodivergent employee gets the auditory support they desperately need to focus. And they get it without the immense pressure or stigma of having to formally disclose their neurodivergence to their boss just to get a pair of headphones.
That is a brilliant connection. By making the accommodation universal, you completely remove the friction of disclosure, which is a massive psychological barrier for many employees.
It really is.
But ACUS doesn't just rely on passive environmental changes like headphones. They dive deep into the granular mechanics of how managers actually manage. And there's one specific managerial moment they highlight that I think is critical to get right the manager handover.
Oh, this made my chest tight just reading about it. Getting a new boss is stressful enough for anybody.
It is. Now imagine you're a neurodivergent employee. You spent 2 years carefully, painstakingly calibrating your working relationship with your manager.
Setting up all those subtle routines.
Exactly. They know your communication style. They know you need clear written instructions in an email rather than vague verbal chats in the hallway. They understand your sensory needs. And then that manager gets promoted or leaves the company. Suddenly, you are facing the prospect of starting from absolute zero with a complete stranger.
It's not just getting a new boss. You have to re-explain and justify your entire operating system all over again. You're terrified they might just revoke all your accommodations.
Exactly.
Yeah.
It can cause severe anxiety.
Right.
So ACUS explicitly outlines a mechanical fix for this. They say there should be a former three-way handover meeting.
The old manager, the new manager, and the worker.
Yes. They all sit down together. They agree on what specific information needs to remain confidential. They formally pass on the written record of agreed-upon reasonable adjustments. And they share useful, practical tips on how they work best together. It ensures the employee doesn't regress or panic simply because HR updated the seating chart.
It's just good, empathetic management. And ACUS lists a bunch of other ways to bake this into the company culture, too. They recommend identifying senior workers to act as neurodiversity role models.
That's huge for visibility.
It is. If a VP or regional director is open about their dyslexia or their ADHD, it completely normalizes the conversation for the junior staff. They also suggest setting up dedicated staff networks and ensuring that employees know exactly what support is available through their recognized trade unions.
Which is vital for representation in difficult meetings or collectively negotiating new company-wide policies. And, if we look at how these internal daily practices connect to the broader global agenda, it becomes very clear why the 2026 Neurodiversity Celebration Week feels substantially different from previous years.
Yeah, there's a real shift happening.
The movement is evolving. It's
Yeah.
shifting from just securing individual accommodations to demanding systemic organizational action.
Let's talk about the 2026 campaign specifically, because there are some brand new initiatives launching this week that are designed to force that evolution. I was looking directly at the official campaign website, and they are rolling out a new format called Host Your Own Webinar.
It's a complete democratization of the conversation.
Exactly. Instead of just a few central organizations or corporate HR departments talking down to people, the campaign is handing out practical, plug-and-play toolkits to parents, schools, and individual employees.
Empowering them locally.
Yeah, they want people to host their own panels and discussions locally. The goal is to take those quiet, informal coffee break conversations where people say, man, our hiring process is broken, and give them the actual tools to turn that into real, on-the-ground change within their specific departments.
And that ties directly into the new theme for 2026, which the website explicitly states is from awareness to action, making organizational change happen.
From awareness to action.
It is a stark recognition that merely acknowledging neurodiversity, simply saying, we see you and we support you, is no longer sufficient. The focus now is entirely on action. It's about implementing best practices in leadership, overhauling systemic issues in how we recruit and retain, and actually scaling inclusion so it's a functional reality across entire workplaces.
And to support that action-oriented goal, Inclusive Employers has a whole lineup of actual webinars running this spring. And rather than just reading you a schedule, I want to highlight what these sessions actually represent.
Let's hear it.
Take one of their spring sessions, for example. They have an entire workshop dedicated to inclusive leadership in sport.
Oh, that's brilliant.
Think about that for a second. Elite sports teams don't treat all their athletes exactly the same. They manage entirely different physical and mental profiles, optimize them for their specific strengths, and use that diversity to win championships.
It's all about individual optimization.
Right. That is the exact mindset companies need to adopt. They also have sessions on breaking the myths on March 18th and a dedicated manager's guide to executing these workplace adjustments practically on April 9th.
Which brings me to a question I want to pose directly to you, the listener.
Yeah.
Think about your own workplace right now. Does your company have a dedicated, standalone neurodiversity policy? Or is it just buried as a single bullet point in a generic 10-year-old diversity statement?
Good question.
And when you are forced to do mandatory annual training modules, do they actually cover neurodiversity? And just as ACCUS strictly recommends, are those policies written in clear, simple, jargon-free language so everyone, regardless of their background, can actually understand their rights and the support available to them?
Because if the answer is no, or, if you aren't sure, this week is exactly the right time to start asking those questions. So what does this all mean?
Yeah, bringing it all together.
When we look at the origin of this movement with a 13-year-old girl who just wanted better resources, the staggering data on 30% higher productivity versus abysmally low employment, and the incredibly actionable mechanical steps from ACCUS, the big takeaway is clear.
It's not just checking a box.
Exactly. Building a neuro-inclusive workplace is not a compliance exercise. It's not about checking a box so HR feels good. It is a proven data-backed strategy to boost your team's morale, lower your employee turnover, and unlock that incredible productivity boost. And you do it simply by letting people work the way their brains were inherently designed to work.
And if we connect this to the bigger picture, there is a small detail in the ACCUS guide that hints at a massive paradigm-shifting change on the horizon.
Oh, what's that?
When discussing recruitment, ACCUS briefly mentions that we should be using alternatives to the traditional interview, such as short paid work trials or practical skills-based assessments.
Right, skipping the small talk entirely.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And it leaves me with this thought. For decades, the traditional standard job interview has heavily favored neurotypical social skills. It tests your ability to make unbroken eye contact, your proficiency at small talk, and your ability to read subtle, unspoken body language.
Which has nothing to do with most jobs.
Precisely. Does a back-end software engineer or a brilliant data analyst actually need those specific social skills to excel at their job? If we are truly moving from awareness to action, are we approaching an era where the standard sit-down job interview becomes entirely obsolete, replaced by systems that simply ask you to prove you can do the work?
Wow. That is a wild, paradigm-shifting thought to chew on. Imagine a world where we just judge the actual output, not the quality of the eye contact.
You would change everything.
It really would. Thank you so much for joining us on this deep dive. Take these insights back to your teams today, look critically at your own front doors and hiring practices, and remember that campaign logo. We aren't looking for standard, fragile little filaments anymore. We want the full, vibrant, puzzle piece brain lighting up the room. See you next time.